Welcome to our third installment of the London Center for Policy Research's Thought to Action program's Great Reset Roundtable. I'm Chris Cordani, your host. This is where members of the London Center talk about the Great Reset as initiated and conceived by Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. Find out more about what we're doing at the London Center on our website, londoncenter.org. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Patreon channel, and we have a lot of things going on. If you're with us on Patreon, you can also get some of these programs before everybody else can. We sneak preview those on our Patreon channel. You can also watch our very intense and very informative Ask Us Anything sessions, which are exclusive to our Patreon patrons. We keep hearing Joe Biden talk about his Build Back Better plan. Build Back Better was what he talked about all throughout his campaign. He talks about it now when he talks about his infrastructure plan. It's Build Back Better. We need to build back better. He says it all the time. But is Build Back Better really a gate opening us to a great reset or something close to that? Our panel is going to discuss that today. With us is London Center for Policy Research President Tony Shaffer, Brian Griffin, Distinguished Fellow, and Pete O'Brien, Distinguished Fellow. Gentlemen, let's start. It's no secret the World Economic Forum head Klaus Schwab and his organization's most vocal leaders advocate a great reset and using the pandemic as an excuse. This would, however, require not the strengthening of the third world nations, but the weakening of the more economically sound ones, sort of breaking them, if you will. Shutting down Western economies was a big step, but note that nations which did not stay in the lockdown for as long, like China, seemed to find a way to strengthen. President Biden loves to repeat that Build Back Better campaign slogan when trying to garner support for his arguably radical policies. The big infrastructure bill not only ignores protecting our power grid from a tax or a CME event, which we talked about on several programs, but it also throws massive amounts of money into pork and social policy having nothing to do with infrastructure, weakening the economy and national defense at the same time. So let's talk about that first. Tony?
Yeah, let me just open by saying that looking at the World Economic Forum and Dr. Klaus Schwab, just a historic note, I tend to believe that we need to be careful of any German who has a vision of social purity and economic control based on their own belief of utopia. Just saying, I think we've been down that path before. It didn't go very well, as I recall. And the parallels between what he's proposing, and I'm being a bit humorous in my presentation, but I'm completely serious. One of the reasons that Germany, Nazi Germany, failed to win World War II was its over-reliance on the nationalization of resources. From 1936 on, I'm going somewhere with this, trust me. From 1936 on, essentially all means of production, to include energy, the spectrum of whatever the state decided was important for the state, became controlled by the state. So, for instance, coal production, one of the things that Germany had massive amounts of, had no resource shortage of, was coal. But the moment the government took it over, there were shortages. Where have we heard this before? Hitler decided that the state would determine what the resource should go for and go to. Money meant nothing after 1936 regarding these sorts of things. So that's the danger of what Klaus Schwab is proposing here, essentially that there's going to be some level of state control, of state dispensation and disposition of all of these resources. And we saw in Argentina, we saw in Venezuela, we've seen in other places, the moment the government comes in and removes the free market, the government cannot anticipate, react, or manage the massive amounts of social and commercial need for resources. It's just not possible. Germany set up in the 30s 4-year plans that were supposed to manage this. It parallels what the Soviets did. You know, it's all socialism. You know, social republics. You know, Russia, Nazi, National Socialism. The idea here is that they're taking and socializing means of production, means of dispensation and disposition. It doesn't work. And all we're seeing here, all we're talking about here, And I challenge the distinguished fellows, since I'm not distinguished, to tell me I'm wrong here. But I think this is all about trying to retool, repackage, rebrand the socialist policies that failed in Nazi Germany, that failed in the Soviet Union, that failed in Venezuela, but somehow believing that we are smarter this time. We, the economic form, are smarter, and we'll get it right. So that's kind of my going in position. Tell me I'm wrong.
If I could jump in, two thoughts. Three thoughts. First off, you're not wrong. But the second thought is, it's of note, people like to say that fascism is somehow on the right end of the spectrum. Fascism is merely a slightly different name for socialism, in which there is both socialism and an emphasis on a national identity. But in a fascist state, the state, as you just said, Tony, the government dictates what the market, but no longer really a market, is going to do. And if you look at Germany, the rich families, the folks at the top at Krupp and IG Farben and Siemens, etc., they made a great deal of money. They did exactly what the Nazi government wanted them to do, and they made a great deal of money in doing it. But there was no free marketplace. And I would add this third thought in. If people want to think that somehow, well, it's different today, and we could in fact figure out what each sector of the economy needs to do and what they need to manufacture, we should have some sort of centralized control, and that somehow you can do this for a population of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. I would challenge you to just do this one thing. Take out a piece of paper. You are sitting there listening to this. Take out a piece of paper and today write down everything you are going to need for the next 4 years, and plan how to buy that, when to buy it, where to buy it, etc. And then do it for everybody else on your street. Right. Just your street. Not asking you to do it for the whole country, just for the 20 or 30 houses on your street. Figure out what they're going to need for the next 5 years, and drop a list. That is what central planning claims to be able to do for a country, in our case, of 331 million people. It is patently absurd, and has never been demonstrated to work. And the harder people try, the worse it gets. And if you point to China and say, well, it's working in China, you need to take a hard look at what it is and what is not working in China, and the people who are being put upon, right? Because it's not really working in China.
And let's not forget the most important lesson that came from Nazi Germany, which is as government gets bigger, their economic policies did not work, but as government gets bigger and decision making becomes removed from the hands of the people and moves into the hand of some type of centralized power, any type of centralized power, then dialogue, discussion, and ideas shrink. Right. And that means that bad ideas can flourish. And that means that somebody somewhere can have an idea, a horrible idea like racial superiority, and run with it. And then how do people challenge that? Well, if they don't have the means to participate in the market, if they no longer have liquid assets, if they no longer have the ability to speak out, then that idea can take over that society. And that's what's happened every single time that government has gotten big enough and centralized enough to produce something like Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, Mao Zedong's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia. Bad ideas catch on because the marketplace of ideas has shrunk, and those bad ideas can't be challenged. And then we have horrible things that come from it. So thank God Hitler failed. And may we never put ourselves in a situation where that much power is consolidated at the top ever again.
But Brian, to that point, that's what they want. They want essentially centralized control distributed to a handful of elites, which then can tell us, well, you can rent things from Amazon, you can't own it. The idea is that everything becomes essentially not owned, which means the state or whatever the government entity owned. And that's what you're talking about here, right? I mean, We're talking about essentially removal of all these decisions from us.
Right. And they're setting themselves up for failure. And they're absolutely kidding themselves if they don't think that setting the stage for that much centralized power won't allow for, if not by them, then the next person to come along to take those reins of power won't allow them to undertake some horrible ideology and push it on people.
And if I could just jump in there too, is one of the things you need to watch here, that every time you've had one of these states start to develop, there's always a few folks right at the very beginning who at least sound benign. But when a crisis develops, either they change their, if you will, change their spots, or someone else emerges. The classic strongman emerges,
Right.
who fixes the problems. And they fix the problem, the process of fixing the problems in a state. And you can go back and take a look at this. Start in ancient Rome, start in ancient Persia, look at Cyrus the Great, look at Diocletian, come forward into the Middle Ages, come forward to the current age. The strong man does this by being a strong man. He doesn't debate. He doesn't ask for new ideas. He tells you what the answer is. Sometimes if you happen to be properly positioned, his telling you what the answer is benefits you. But most of the people are not aided by this anymore, except that the crisis ends. The crisis ends, and now the state has more power. So
Well, and this relates to the overall trend regarding woke. The idea here is to use that division of race, color, of creed as a tool to reorganize under this ideal, Pete, if you will, that the state knows better. We will be the ones who decide equity and fairness. And Brian, this goes back to your point regarding the economic control. It seems to me, to your point, and boy, I could say a lot and get in trouble here. The utopian ideas that were put forth of social purity link directly into how much benefit you gain from the government. Is that a correct assessment?
Is that for me?
Yeah, for you, Brian.
You're gonna have to do that point again, Tony. Let me jump off again. Sorry.
All right,
Okay,
so let me
take two here.
restate
Take two.
that. So what Pete is saying regarding the overall underlying ideas that you have to have a certain level of wokeness to be able to understand and use this Build Back Better concept. You're using essentially the wokeism, the idea that everybody's racist and the government is the only one that can determine fairness. We, the government, have to be the ones who step in and tell you that you're a racist and we'll figure out how to fix it. That then, Brian, links into the economic piece you were mentioning regarding how they control this for purposes of telling you the more pure you are of the government's interpretation of social equity and utopian concepts, the more you benefit economically. If you don't go along, you're not part of the economic picture. Is that a correct assessment?
Well, that's right, because the idea behind wokeism is that values must be directed to people from the top down. And the problem is that government doesn't have any internal innate values, and government is designed to grow itself and sustain itself and consolidate more power, which means that its values will be whatever it can say or do to get more power. So if that's who's deciding what values are, and then the economic means to push back against that is taken from people. Like I said, the ability to organize, to politicize, to voice opposition, if that's taken from people so that value system won't be challenged, then we're left with only one option. And I think the woke crowd is getting it wrong. I think that their focus that they have on race and on characteristics that are not based on merit, that are not based on choice, but that are based on, demographics that you're born with, to focus on that and to organize society by that and to force society to compete based on those things, those are wrong. Fortunately, I can still speak out against that. Fortunately, the four of us can be here on this YouTube channel speaking about those things, but if the economic means to do so were taken from us, then what challenges an idea like that? And what challenges any idea, any bad idea, from allowing it to flourish?
And that's a great point. If you kind of roll back and start looking at the specifics of some of the things that the current administration is looking at, it speaks right to what you're saying, Brian. One of the small items in a $2 trillion bill, because it's only $8 or $9 or $10 billion a year, is that the plan adds 87,000 IRS agents to the IRS, and in the bill gives them the authority. One wonders as to the constitutionality of this, but gives them the authority essentially to go through all your bank accounts without any predicate cause. They can just start searching your bank accounts and looking for things that they consider to be aberrations, and then essentially run you down on those oddities. So you have essentially the government asking for both the authority and the personnel to spend time routing around in everybody's bank account. Now they'll claim they're going to go after the rich people. Well, if you're Bill Gates, you already have your money hidden. You don't have your money in bank accounts. It's not there. It's not visible in a bank account. And so
well, the other thing about Pete, the rich are going to fight you. They have the reason, a means and resource to fight you. They're going to go after people they know can't fight, have no recourse. But
right. The four of us have no real ability to challenge the IRS in court over any extended period of time.
Right.
Or the Justice Department, I might add, which we've seen politicized.
And keep in mind, the political class can, well, do a legal form of, let's say, curveball insider trading. So they'll know what's going on ahead of time as well.
Absolutely. They'll be able to carve out a niche for themselves.
As we know, it's far better to be awake than woke. But let's keep in mind, an important component is the how. How do we build back better? What do we build back better from? You can't do that. You can't build back from a booming economy. You can't build back from solid policy, and you can't build back from better defense. What you need to do is do something, well, for lack of a better term, great, but I'll say enormous. How about that? The way to do this is to break something. How about the supply chain? That's what happened. The COVID panic provided a perfect cover. There were shutdowns by the masses all over Western society. Many states and European nations were under complete lockdown multiple times. And in America, the blue-led states, as well as mentioned before, massive. This is even after 15 days to flatten the curve was over. Shutdowns kept producers from putting together food, mining, lumber, steel, aluminum, computer chips, creating shortages and skyrocketing prices. This breaks the supply chain altogether, and we have these shortages, high prices, huge inflation, increasing demand, and poorer people, opening desperation required for a great reset compliance in theory, and a sort of build back better guise.
I got something to say about that. I mean, look, here's the pattern that we saw over the last couple of years. The government shuts everything down. The government forces business not to be open. The government forces people to restrict the amount of not only money that they have, the amount of money that they can make. And the government comes in with a $1.9 trillion plan to give that money back to people and then claim themselves as the hero, right? But basically what happened is the government is taking credit for saving people from itself, from the government. Classic pattern of authoritarianism, unfortunately. It's to cause the means of the greatest destruction on people, or withhold, the ability for people to thrive and make decisions and make money and have access to the free market, and then make itself be the hero, the savior. And unfortunately, we see that too often around the world these days, where people are kept basically in positions of oppression, so that the government can be the only source of people's ability to get their basic needs met. That's why the free market is such a powerful alternative to government, and that's why government fears and wants to stifle the free market, because it's in direct competition. They're in direct competition with one another, and the government hates anything or anybody that competes with its ability to be the greatest power.
And COVID was a perfect cover for that.
Oh yeah,
right.
Pete.
Well, I would add on top of what Brian just said too, was that the creation of a series of programs that have now gone forward to if you will, economically and physically restrict Americans. 2 years ago, we were a net exporter of energy. We're back to being a net importer, purely based upon policy decisions. And there's plenty of energy in this country. There's enough energy in this country to last for several centuries as a net exporter of energy. There is a pile of energy in this country in the form of coal, natural gas, oil, and of course, uranium. And if you want really clean electricity, you don't build farms with solar panels that leach heavy metals into the soil. You build nuclear reactors. But let's not go there right now.
Right.
But meanwhile, we have the government saying that we want more electric cars. They're putting up barriers to people. In the future, there'll be barriers to people buying gasoline engine-powered cars, restricting mobility of people, particularly the people in the bottom half of the economy. Meanwhile, they're raising the price of fuel, further restricting the people in the bottom half of the economy who need to be able to move.
Right.
And so you have this, they attack things from a number of different angles at the same time, making this thing increasingly, if you will, an octopus that's holding on to the average American. And the only way to go back to it is to, as Brian so accurately says here, is to go back to a market-based economy.
Well, I like to pick up on that point, Pete, of what you guys said. Look, one of the things that was clear from the COVID issue, from the 2 weeks to depress the curve to where we're at now, is that fear was used essentially as a tool to replace the free market with government. Government knew better, therefore we're going to tell you what you need to do and not do. And now President Biden is offering your freedom back if you get the shot. We're going to give you back your freedom. And so, first off, I've gone on with my life pretty much normal. I travel, I do my own thing. I've never accepted that, but it's very clear that they've used fear as a tool to essentially separate the individual from the free market and make them more dependent on the government. And one of the no greater example was this whole, even Trump fell for it, this whole idea of these checks back from the IRS. We're going to give you $1,400. Yeah, but you just had me pay $25,000 for taxes.
Exactly.
How is that supposed to help me? I mean, I'm paying you for the privilege of you giving back my money. And again, both sides did this because even the conservatives seems to not understand, at least those in power, it's like, this isn't helping. The best thing you could do is diminish, if not eliminate, taxation so that people can maintain what they have and the government can go off and do its own thing. Because Brian, I think you made this point, all production comes from the private sector. The government does absolutely nothing to produce anything. It's a leech. So, and we've seen those who are most enlightened to reopen the economy rapidly. Texas, I was in Texas recently, things are popping, and Florida. And those states more readily recognize that the science says you need to get people out, and masks don't work for the most part. I mean, if in very limited circumstance. And oh, by the way, for most demographics, a 99% recovery rate, in case you get it. So the other side, the progressives have used the science, or I should say they've denied the science for purposes of trying to maintain the fear. That fear is then used to separate individuals from the free market and make them swag over and trust the government. And boy, I don't know how at this point people don't understand what a fraud the federal government, CDC, has been regarding the science behind this. And now, it's breaking. Something I said a year ago. Looks like the Wuhan lab had a hand in allowing a weaponized version of the virus to leak out. Oh, that
and Beijing had a hand in covering it up and letting the world get infected.
Right.
Yeah.
The thing is, though,
5 million deaths.
The thing is, we can't gloss over the idea that the stimulus checks are being pushed out again, which in a way was a good thing and not a good thing. If you shut the supply chain down, you shut down all sorts of businesses, where's that money coming from? You have to keep printing it. Keep printing it, weaken the dollar, which is basically the world's standard currency. And again, the only way to get to a great reset or readjust the world's, let's say, future globalist economy in the Davos dream is to weaken the strong nations and weaken the strongest currencies. And America's been playing ball with this for a long time. That's what Build Back Better does. Brian?
Well, I just think that the biggest lesson that came out of all of this is that our government is way too big. We've had two perfect examples so far. So Pete talked about how the government can basically manipulate policy to reduce our energy independence, not because of a lack of access to natural resources, but simply out of the government's vision for what society should be. Harms the American people, but helps achieve their political vision for society. Number two, the government claimed to or tried to set itself up to be the sole dictator and source of science, basically. It sounds simple and silly, but that's the way that they've set themselves up. If the CDC doesn't say it, then it can't be science, and there's no ability for the private sector to test and confirm or deny or add empirical data to the decision-making process. The government is the sole arbiter of what is scientific and what isn't. And then I'll give example number three, the labor market. Sheerly through government policy, we have an employment rate somewhere above 6%, and we have 8.1 million people out of the job market. How does that make any sense? How do those numbers make sense in the same country at the same time? Because the policy, the powerful use of incentives in this infrastructure bill and otherwise, where unemployment is basically more incentivized than working, has, through government dictates, caused us to have a unemployment rate and plenty of people who can take the jobs who don't want it. So again, this is reshaping society through economic policy in the vision of what people at the top think it should be, no matter what's good for people, no matter what's good for the economy, but solely based on a political agenda. That's incredibly dangerous. And by the way, all of these things have been done through unelected bureaucratic arms of our executive branch, which now has an employment figure in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. When are we going to realize that this government is way too big and that it's too easy to reshape American society based on your political agenda right at the top?
And if I can just add in, give a few more numbers here. How much money have they been printing? As Brian was saying, they're printing money. In January of 2008, just before the 2008 bubble burst, that year before, there was about $900 billion in circulation. As of last September, there was about $4.5 trillion in circulation. And now there's about $5.5 trillion in circulation. So we increased the money supply between 2008 and 2020. We increased the money supply more than 300%. And then in the last 6-7 months, we've increased it another, on top of that 400%, 300% rather, we've increased it another 25%. We've increased it $1 trillion in the last 7 months. And we're still printing money. And by the way, we're told by the experts at the Fed that they have this under control, that there will not be any inflation. If you believe that, call me. I have a great deal of agree.
Opening the nation's borders is a key component to Schwab's Great Reset, which calls for all of the European and Western civilization-dominated nations to open up those borders and take in as many immigrants from the third world as possible. Couple that with leftist policies in place in major cities like sanctuaries and everything else like that, and an overwhelming attitude of anti-assimilation that comes with it, you've destroyed a nation's unity. And that opens it up for globalism and a great reset. Joe Biden's immigration policies are arguably in direct compliance with Klaus Schwab's suggestion in that realm.
2 points just to open up the conversation. One of the greatly ironic and often not discussed facts is a guy named President Reagan turned California blue. And he did that by the granting of amnesty. First time and only time the president's ever granted amnesty to individuals here illegally. And the theory, the bargain was he was going to get a closed border. He didn't. And we've seen essentially, I think he or someone else said, that which you subsidize, you're going to get more of. So without following his own policy, he did something that essentially turned, that massive state into a blue utopia, because it's different than most other states, and it's going to stay that way apparently. So I think that's the first lesson. The moment you grant amnesty, you're going to essentially make sure that you create a permanent underclass that'll assure continued voting of the left. Secondly, regarding that as an extension is the value of labor. Even Bernie Sanders used to talk about the need to have a control of borders just for economic reasons, because the moment you start allowing unregulated individual, low cost labor into the market, it lowers the value of everybody. So everybody wants these, oh, we want minimum wage of $10, $15. It can't be sustained by the fact that you're flooding the market with people who will be willing to work for $2 or $3 an hour. So it's this dystopia that they create, again, goes back to the point of government control, because when you get this so far off kilter, the government has to come in and help create the conditions to regulate. So this is all related. And I think that's why you see the Biden administration working. This is not random. This crisis, that's why Kamala Harris hasn't been to the border. It's not like they're concerned about the crisis. They like the crisis. They benefit from this politically. This fits their model of what they want for the rest of America. They want to turn America into California. So there you go. That's my view.
I think more than the border and immigration, what's being done here is eroding the concept of the nation state altogether. That allows, again, for unelected people at the top to have even more power, especially over people in a government that they aren't a part of. What do we see happen in the European Union? Basically, is that unelected bureaucrats from one part of Europe are making decisions about the lives of people in a sovereign state all the way across the continent. I think it's a perfect example of the danger of globalism and what happens when the sovereignty of citizens is eroded through the demonization and the destruction of the concept of a nation state. And by the way, it's a good thing that we have nation states, because just like the states in our federal government that can compete for the best ideas and through competition create better societies, the same thing happens on the world stage. And some countries get things right and some countries get things wrong. And for a long time, America had it very right that people, the individual, should be their own sovereign, that ideas should be free to discuss, and that people's ultimate decision-making authority should rest in the hands of the individual. And I think that there are people who look at that and want to diminish that idea on the world stage and have control over more of Americans' lives and more of the lives of people around the world. And they're going to do that through the destruction of the concept of the nation state in the hearts and minds of people. And they're going to do that through very deceptive tactics also, like making it a case about immigration. I mean, look, both sides want immigration to happen, right? There's no political party against immigration. There's debate over the way to keep it organized and fair. But they're trying to deceptively say, oh no, one side's against immigration. And I don't think that's what's happening. I think what's happening is that obviously it's the nation state that's under attack.
If I can piggyback on that, Brian, I would submit that there is a gigantic, if you will, conflict here, and the question is the question between centralization and subsidiarity. The question of decisions being made either at lowest level possible, your town council, your local school board, or made at a higher level. And the direction that we are headed in, at least from the government, as you just so accurately put it, Brian, is towards not a nationalization of all these solutions, but an internationalization of all these solutions. That in the end, and this has been stated openly, in the end, they want a global government, and the global government would decide everything. They would set standards. So they would set standards not simply for how the market works, not that there really would be a true free market, but how the controlled market would work, how the energy markets would work, what crops would be grown when. But those sets of rules would expand continually until you would have an international standard on how a house is built. You would have an international standard on how roads are built and where roads are built and what kind of houses are built. Are there single family houses or multiple family houses? Will there be a local school board? No, there'll be a centralized school board. It may be located, for all we know, it may be located in Vienna, but there will be an international standard, a global standard for everything. and you'll be required to comply with that standard. Now, if you think that's a good idea, then go along with this. But if you don't think that, if you think that you as a parent, for example, should have a right to challenge what's being taught to your third grader, then you can't agree with this process. You have to push back. If you think that you should have a right to agree, or rather to challenge what kind of business is allowed in your neighborhood, then you need to push back. Those simple decisions, the simple decisions of what happens next to you, are being taken away from you. That is the whole point. That is the end result of this end of the nation state and the creation of essentially a global government, is to deprive you of your ability to affect your life, your livelihood, your neighborhood directly.
Yeah, Pete, that's a great point. And it's funny, if someone were to look at our conversation here out of context, they might think we were discussing the plot of a George Orwell novel. We're responding to the written, desires and visions put out by people talking about this Great Reset, to Klaus Schwab's book, and people in Davos and other political platforms and policies that have these written stated goals of doing these things like internationalizing decision making, reducing the power of the free market, taking choice away from people. So it's sad that we're at this point, but everybody needs to understand the argument so that they understand just how incredibly unfar-fetched this is, and can make up their mind on it and push back against it.
The question is, does Build Back Better really mean Santa Claus is coming to town? Thank you for being with us on this installment of the London Center for Policy Research's Thought to Action Great Reset Roundtable. We'll be producing more in this series, but if you'd like to watch the first two GRTs, hey, everybody else is initializing their names in their shows. We can do it too. Find them on our YouTube channel, on Rumble, Dailymotion, and website as well. Our website, londoncenter.org. Also, feel free to like, share, and comment on this video. We would like to know what you think. And hit that subscribe button as well as that bell. And join us on Patreon for sneak previews and exclusive content. Patreon.com/thoughttoaction. For our panelists and the London Center for Policy Research, once again, thank you for listening.